Queen's Galley. So I have a double reason for being happy to be here tonight. First, I can talk to you a little about some really cool food science. The other is to thank you and to thank Renee and everybody else, all of the artists and the volunteers that came today to support Kingston. Just all of Kingston. The artists, the community-minded individuals that get together to want to make this a better place to live. It's a really incredible place to be, and this is a very heartwarming space to be in, and I'm thrilled to be here tonight. So I'm also at the end of a really long work week, so if I start to fall asleep, feel free to throw things at me. Absolutely. So tonight, I looked at what the other chefs were doing. It was classic, kind of autumn foods, and I realized that this was an art space, so I wanted to do something different. Really, really different. For those of you that know me, this is not an unusual thing. At least not for me. So tonight we're going to play with our food a little bit. I'm going to learn a little bit about something that has been labeled molecular gastronomy. Sounds kind of high-tech, isn't it? What we're really going to do is play with salt and seaweed. But they've been kind of transformed into different things. The seaweed has been turned into sodium alginate and agar-agar. These are thickening agents that are natural. Mother Nature gives us these, and we can use them for different things. They're used to thicken foods. They can be used for puddings and for flans. But there's other really cool stuff we can do with this. Today, we're going to talk about spherification, making little balls. So there are two different ways we can do spherification. We can do this with alginate, which is cool because it makes a cool little ball that the inside stays liquid, which means it pops in your mouth. It's been known as called faux caviar or fruit caviar. If anybody's attended a Queen's Galley catering event, Sloan is running it. She remembers the vegan caviar. So it's kind of fun. It does look like caviar depending on what you're doing your little balls with. Today we're going to do apple. And it's because it was kind of one of those things with apple season, there's apple juice all over the place. And the other spherification technique uses agar-agar. And that makes a perfect little ball, except we chill it at the end rather than dunk it into salt water. But it makes a solid sphere rather than staying liquid inside. So it's kind of cool. You get the end result of a little ball that pops in your mouth. One stays liquid, one doesn't. So I guess we'll get started on one of them. They're really easy. I kind of feel guilty about doing them because the actual food making takes about 45 seconds. So I'm going to try and stretch it out. All right, so we'll do the apple first. You can use absolutely any fruit juice as long as it does not contain calcium. You can use any wine. You can use any liquid, but you want to make sure that it doesn't have calcium in it. The calcium interacts with the sodium calcium, the lactate, with the salt that we're going to be using, the salt bath. If you have calcium in your liquid, your spheres aren't going to sphere. They're just going to be glowing. You don't want that. It's not attractive, it doesn't taste good, it's not appetizing. I pre-made my solution by taking some fresh apple juice that's been just apple juice and adding the alginate. Alginate you can get online, you can get at a health food store. It comes in either little packages like this, canisters like this. For 8 ounces of juice, of liquid, you're only going to use about a gram. So how many drug dealers in the audience today? Okay, all right, so nobody's ready to admit it. So, you can eyeball it. Honestly, you just kind of want something that's goopy. That's an industry term, by the way, goopy. So once it gets goopy, you're good to go. But you do want to let it sit. The easiest way to mix this stuff, you can have an immersion blender. In fact, if you go online and look up spherification, it's going to tell you to use an immersion blender. Chances are in your kitchen you might have a regular blender, Vitamix, You might even have one of those little magic bullet things. Go ahead, and you have one, don't you?
No, the Vitamix. It's amazing, but it's so expensive. So expensive.
All of those the pieces of equipment will get the mixture incorporated. There's only 2 ingredients. But you've got to get them mixed well. If you stand there with a whisk, you're going to be there for a couple of hours. If you use a blender or immersion blender, it's going to happen really quickly. The downside to that is you're going to get air bubbles. Now we're making tiny little spheres. If you're making tiny little spheres, you want them to be spheres of food, not air. So make it ahead of time, let it sit. An hour or so, 30 minutes, depends on what you're doing. I did this yesterday, so we should have most of the air bubbles out of here. And again, it is Vitamix. All right. So Christine's going to come on up here. I've been here for Christine Brown. She is our finance director at Queen's Galley.
Not the cook, finance.
But she knows how to cook. But she's never done this before.
No.
Never. And she's still going to be like, all right, you're going to embarrass me in front of all these people. The little, really funky little canister says calcium lactate. You know what that is? Salt. It's salt that's in a powder. It's just ground up into a powder. So I'm going to add about 2 teaspoons. It's very fine salt. That's all it is. I'm going to dissolve the salt so we have a saltwater bath. I already have a cup of juice. You want to use the same juice that you're making the little spheres out of. If I were making this ahead of time for a couple of hundred, although it turns out there may be a couple of hundred here, there would be another process in between, a container of plain water to give it a rinse. We're going to do this pretty quickly. Trick to this is you don't want to go too high, you don't want to go too low. As soon as I drop the sphere into my salt bath, immediately that chemical reaction is going to create a shell or a skin around my juice and my alginate. I want to make sure that I'm dropping big enough that they're create something different that looks visually similar to what we're used to something else. Spaghetti. Instead of having a pasta made with flour or some sort of grain, taking something, a liquid. In this case, it's an heirloom tomato puree. It's got a little bit of Parmesan cheese that has gone through the blender and through the strainer. You can get this at a local health food store. Again, online. This, very similar to gelatin, needs to come to a boil before it works. The difference is that the gelatin takes a long time to set. This stuff sets really quickly. So I have about 16 ounces of my liquid. I'm adding about a tablespoon of agar. Gelatin, you have to let bloom first, which means you want to soften it and melt it before you've actually added it. This stuff you don't have to. See, stove. Everybody know that phytins, like plant rhinitis stuff? Yeah. So the same thing that we did with the soup, using the same product. The agar, this one is going to form on those little balls. We're going to chill them in oil. This is balsamic vinegar. I've used about 10 ounces. Use the agar right in with the vinegar, and that's the on stove. while this is still warm, I'm drying. The reason that I knotted these is when I put them in the ice water bath, if they're not knotted, they'll empty out into the water, and I don't want that. I want to be able to at least have it make a noodle. I want it to make spaghetti. We abandoned the So I've got a container of oil in the freezer. Because I want this to be as cold as possible. So I've got a hot balsamic vinegar, agar. You can use a squeeze bottle, you can use a syringe, you can use a squeeze bottle, you can use a spoon and you can drop it in. These are going to set up pretty quickly. This is going to set up in the cold oil. Any shape that you want it to be. We can do this in little balls, we can do this in strands, we can do this in teardrops. It'll settle to the bottom of the glass. When it settles, it cools on the way down. So you want to use something tall and thin rather than short and flat. Sorry. Depending on where I drop the oil from, you see the size of our little balsamic pearls. Some of them are large. Balsamic pearls. You see a little one. To get the spaghetti strands out, use another syringe that's completely empty. If somebody's annoying you in the kitchen, just aim it. You want to hold that down? Initially, this is the tough going. No, move the strand. And once it decides to come out, it just shoots out. There you go. Okay. It's just the basil infused oil. Because the whole idea, I'm not ready to give up on summer yet. You know, some of you guys might be, I'm not. Because I've taken something that is savory and I've made it cold, my taste buds and taste buds of my guests aren't going to pick up on flavor right away. The first taste receptor that you're going to get is sweet. The second is going to be salt. I want to make sure that there's some sort of a salt element on that plate, because when you're eating something, especially when it's cold, so if you're making, I don't know, a savory cold dip, and you taste it while it's warm, you're stupid. Don't do that. When if you're making something that's going to be served cold, you want to make sure that you season it very well. You want to make sure that your salt levels, that when you're tasting it when it's warm, it should taste slightly salty. When it's cold, it will be, you're less able to taste it. So I'm hitting this with some pink sea salt. A, I like the way it looks. B, when we eat it, so molecular gastronomy could praise. The only thing that we're missing. Yes! So you can still slice the tomato and the mozzarella and your balsamic vinegar. But if you're going to come to an artist studio, make it look a little bit like art.